How does a planet affect the ruler of the sign it is in? I'm going to talk about that today, but first, I want to let you know that I'm giving a new workshop on family and relationship dynamics on January 19th. It's a 2-hour online workshop, and you can register at michellesmidheaven.com. This workshop is open to all levels, and we'll be looking for the patterns that shape our relationships and how we can build a stronger foundation based on the natal chart. I hope to see you in class, and I'll leave a link in the description below. All right, let's get started and let's think of how a planet might influence its host. Sometimes we find a planet in its own home sign, such as Venus in Libra or Mercury in Gemini, for example. And that's really great because they're going to be able to take care of all of the topics and themes that they represent in the chart. But very often a planet lands in somebody else's sign, and then there is some adjustment needed. For example, when you have Mercury in Aries, Mercury will impact the ruler of Aries, which is Mars. And this is really important because it's not only going to affect the house topics where Mercury is located, Mercury will also affect its ruler, and vice versa, of course. There's a relationship between the planet in the sign and the ruler of that sign. And for the ancient Greeks, that is a very important guest-host relationship. It's very much like you're having someone stay over at your house for a while, and you'll both have to adjust to each other's presence and company. You'll get to know that person's habits, and the same goes for planets. Of course, there are many layers to this and many perspectives that will color our interpretation. But today, I really want to focus on how a guest might affect its host, because you will see that each planet has a very particular way in which it impacts its host, and that way is very much determined by the nature of the guest planets. Let's start with the moon, and we're going to think of the characteristics of the moon and her behavior because that will determine how she affects her host. Think of the reflective nature of the moon. The moon reflects the sunlight and then translates that divine solar light into different shapes and forms that we can see in the sky as she goes through her entire cycle in relation to the sun. From the new moon gradually gaining light all the way to the full moon phase, and then she loses light until she meets the sun again, and all the phases in between show the moon in her various shapes. This lunar changeability of taking on new forms while absorbing and disseminating the light of the sun describes the moon's behavior very clearly. It indicates how well she can absorb the outside energies and reflect the light, or even kind of imitate the light. We could say a full moon imitates the sun in a way. We actually see that people with a prominent moon placement in the chart are often very good at imitating people. And in general, they're really good at adjusting themselves to their environment, or at least they can read the room very well. And they know what's happening in their environment, so they can attune to that. So keeping all of that in mind, it means that wherever you find the moon in your chart, look at the sign the moon is in, and you'll know that the moon will easily adapt to her host. And that means that the moon, for example, in one of Mars's signs, Aries or Scorpio, the moon is going to imitate Mars in the best way possible. A moon in Venus's signs, Taurus and Libra, will behave like Venus. Medieval astrologer Abu Mashar said that the moon is a king with kings and a slave with slaves, indicating her incredible adaptability. So the moon in your chart is essentially assimilating the ruler of that sign. And if you think about that, it's exactly the reason why the moon is such an important factor in everybody's chart, because in her mimicking of the host, it's almost like we are collecting or harnessing the energy of that host twice in our chart. So even though Mars is elsewhere in the chart, if the moon is in Aries or Scorpio, she will almost act like a second Mars in your chart because she naturally imitates or almost becomes her host. And there are definitely many more layers to this, but I think it is good to keep this in mind, and it might be interesting to add this layer of interpretation to your practice. If we think of the other planets, let's take a look at Venus, for example. Venus is the goddess of beauty, always trying to create harmony in her environment, whether that is through kindness, diplomacy, or through literally bringing more beauty to her environment, through her good taste and a good eye for the correct proportions. Translated to her relationship with her host, it means that wherever Venus is in your chart, whatever sign she is in, she will try to find a balanced compromise with her ruler. She's always going to try to cooperate with her ruler and make things run as smoothly as possible for her ruler. And of course, in some signs, that's going to be easier than in other signs, but she's basically going to try to make the best of every situation. And similarly, Jupiter will try to work with his ruler, but it's a little bit different here because Jupiter, as the god of law and order and beliefs, is going to try to work together with his ruler in a way that establishes some kind of system. Jupiter will make efforts to cooperate with his ruler following a certain code of ethics or a higher goal. This is how Jupiter tries to form a unity. So while Venus tries to create unity and cooperation through being kind and keeping things very pleasant, Jupiter tries to create unity through establishing rules and a coherent belief system or ideology, if you will, that Jupiter finds meaningful and that is going to support his shared goals with his host. When we think of Mars, on the other hand, we now have a planet that will challenge its ruler because that's the nature of Mars. Mars is rebellious and competitive. And before Mars starts fighting for his ruler, Mars will fight against his ruler. Mars is not willing to find a compromise between him and his host. And I actually talked about this in my Mars talk a couple of months ago. And we have to look for Mars's ruler in the chart, right? You're going to find that that ruler is dealing with a very difficult guest. Mars's ruler is going to be challenged and is going to have to prove to Mars that he's a worthy ruler. So it's almost like Mars's host needs to adapt to Mars because Mars doesn't take orders from anyone unless his ruler is perfectly noble. Saturn is another difficult guest and will simply be very cold and distant toward his host, and Saturn will simply say no to any of the plans of the ruler of the sign he's in. This is like having to work with a guest who does not want to engage in any activities, someone who is indifferent and aloof. And any suggestions that the host makes is likely to be dismissed by Saturn. Saturn is just going to say, nope, I'm not interested, or this won't work, and that's not good enough. And then the task of the host or the task of the native is going to be to start doing it anyway and to appeal to Saturn's qualities of self-discipline and taking things seriously. And then once Saturn gets going, it'll be hard to stop him, actually. Mercury is our curious and talkative guest who asks his host a lot of questions and interacts fluently with the host, whether the host wants that or not. So Mercury brings busyness and a lot of skills and talent and ingenuity to help the host. Although Mercury is also very much like a kid asking why and what if every 10 seconds, and this is why Mercury's placement in the chart is so prominent. Mercury brings the native's attention to that house because he indicates the area where the mind is constantly asking questions. It represents whatever the mind is preoccupied with. And then lastly, we have the sun, who kind of overwhelms his host with his presence. For the host, it feels like the king is visiting. And in turn, of course, because the sun, the king, is a guest of his ruler, that ruler is blessed with a kind of social status of eminence. The presence of the sun alone automatically places his host in a position of great distinction. The sun brings in a royal atmosphere and motivates his host to behave in the best way possible. Representing God or the source of goodness, the sun radiates that goodness, and his ruler then benefits from that. To summarize, the benefic planets Venus and Jupiter adapt to their ruler or host and try to accommodate their ruler in a constructive manner. While the malefic planets, on the other hand, Mars and Saturn, are going to challenge the authority of their rulers, as they're going to feel hindered or frustrated by their ruler or feel some contempt for their ruler. And now their host has a difficult task to fulfill the agenda of the topics it represents, despite the chaos, discord, or dissent that the malefic guest is creating. It's just going to take more time to establish some kind of order out of the initial chaos. And this is, of course, why the places where Mars and Saturn are located in the natal chart are usually the most difficult places, where there is quite an elaborate learning curve. And it's going to take a lot of experience and patience to find the right approach to those areas of life. And we can find solutions to any issues in those areas through the rulers of the malefics, and of course, through our free will and our ability to make better choices through an increased awareness and lots of experience. All right, of course, there is a lot more to it if we take the dignities into account and so forth, but I hope that this technique was helpful in giving you some extra insights into how the planets can relate to one another in your natal chart. I'd love to hear what you find out about your chart. Please let me know in the comments. I hope to see you in my next workshop, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Until next time.